The old police station in Lakewood, Oregon, was quiet that morning. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and dust floated in the air like old memories that refused to die. Detective Sarah Collins was working alone in the basement, cleaning the storage room filled with forgotten files. Most of the boxes had yellow tags and broken tape. She had been told to throw away what was no longer useful. But then she saw something different. In the far corner, hidden under a pile of old reports, there was a box covered in thick dust. On the label, she could barely read the faded words. Case hashtag 041, 1985, the Lakewood disappearance. Sarah froze for a second. She had heard that name before. Every detective in town had. It was one of Lakewood's oldest mysteries, a case no one ever solved. A young woman named Grace Miller had gone missing one night at the lake. Her boyfriend, Ethan Turner, was suspected, but he also vanished soon after. With no bodies and no evidence, the case went cold. Curiosity pulled Sarah closer. She opened the box. Inside, she found old photographs, police notes, and one strange item of VHS tape with a red sticker that said, "Evidence, do not destroy." She brushed the dust off the tape. Her heart beat faster. What could be on this, she whispered to herself. Sarah carried the box upstairs and plugged an old video player into her office TV. The screen flickered, showing static lines before the image appeared. The picture was old and grainy, but clear enough to see a young couple, Ethan and Grace, standing near Lakewood Pier at night. The moonlight reflected on the water, and they looked happy, laughing, and dancing together. Sarah smiled softly. It looked like pure love, young, innocent, full of dreams. Then, everything changed. The camera shook. Grace looked over her shoulder, suddenly afraid. The laughter stopped. There was a scream, sharp, desperate, and real. The screen turned black. Sarah leaned forward, replaying the last few seconds again and again, but the tape always ended the same way, in darkness. She sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Why had this tape never been reviewed before? And who filmed it? She searched the police database and saw that the original investigator on the case was Detective Alan Pears, retired 20 years ago. But there was no record of any tape mentioned in his notes. It was like the evidence had been forgotten or hidden. Sarah felt something strange inside her. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a pull, a need to know what really happened to Grace. Maybe, deep down, she saw something of herself in that girl. Someone who loved too deeply, trusted too much, and disappeared without a goodbye. She decided to reopen the case. Sarah went to the evidence room and signed out the files. As she carried them to her desk, she noticed something odd. A shadow passed behind her. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air vent. She shook it off and started reading the old reports. Witnesses said they saw Grace and Ethan arguing near the lake that night. Another said a black car was parked nearby with its engine running. But no one ever found that car. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. The whole case was full of missing pieces. Hours passed. The rain outside grew heavier. When Sarah finally looked up, it was almost midnight. She stretched, turned off the TV, and grabbed her coat. As she reached the door, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then, they went dark. Sarah's heart jumped. She waited, her hand still on the doorknob. After a few seconds, the lights came back on, but something was different. On her desk, right beside the old tape, lay a note. It wasn't there before. The paper was clean, white, and folded neatly. She opened it slowly. Written in black ink were 6 words. "Some memories should stay buried, Sarah." Her hands trembled. She looked around the empty room. "Who's there?" she called out. But no one answered. The hall outside was silent. The air felt colder, heavier. She checked the security camera feed from her computer. No one had entered the building since 10 p.m. The front door was locked. Every exit was secure. But that note, it was real. Sarah sat down, staring at the message again. How did they know her name? Whoever left it was still watching her, maybe from the shadows, maybe from outside in the rain. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Most detectives would stop there. Most would report the note and move on. But Sarah wasn't most detectives. Something about Grace's eyes in that video, the way she looked back before the screen went black, felt like a silent plea for help. "Don't worry, Grace," Sarah whispered. "I'll find out what happened to you." She picked up the tape again, studying the label, the handwriting, the small crack on the edge. There was something hidden in this mystery, something that didn't want to be found. As she left her office, thunder rolled across the sky. The storm had grown stronger. Outside, across the street, a dark figure stood under a streetlight, watching her every move. Sarah didn't see him. But he saw her. He waited until she drove away before whispering softly into the rain, "You shouldn't have watched the tape." The next morning, Detective Sarah Collins walked into the police station with dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept much. The note from last night still echoed in her head. Some memories should stay buried. She kept asking herself, who left it? The security footage showed no one entering or leaving. It didn't make sense. But Sarah wasn't the type to back down from fear. She had reopened the Lakewood disappearance, and now she was going to find the truth no matter what. She started by reading every report from 1985. Each page told the same story. Grace Miller, age 22, disappeared on June 10. Her boyfriend Ethan Turner, age 24, was last seen with her near the lake. They were young, in love, and planning to get married. But something went wrong that night. Witnesses said they heard shouting. One person said a black car was parked nearby, engine running. Another said they saw lights flashing near the lake, like someone using a camera. Then silence. The next day, both Ethan and Grace were gone. Sarah looked at the old photos again, the same happy couple from the tape. They didn't look like killers. They looked like two people deeply in love. She needed to know where Ethan lived. The old file said, 26 Maplewood Drive, an address outside town. Sarah grabbed her coat and drove there. The road to Maplewood was long and empty. Old trees leaned over the cracked pavement. When she reached the house, it looked abandoned, windows broken, grass tall, mailbox rusted. The kind of place where time had stopped. Sarah stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under her shoes. The air smelled of rain and old wood. She pushed open the gate, which groaned loudly, like it didn't want her there. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. She flashed her light around the living room. Old photographs were still on the walls, Ethan and Grace smiling on the pier, holding ice cream, sitting under the same tree. Sarah felt something heavy in her chest. They were so happy. She picked up one photo. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Forever, ENG." A noise made her jump. The sound of footsteps. "Hello," she called out, her voice shaking slightly. No answer. Just the sound of the wind moving through the broken window. Then, a voice came from behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Sarah turned quickly, her hand going to her gun. An old woman stood in the doorway, holding a flashlight. Her eyes were sharp and tired. "I'm Detective Collins," Sarah said carefully. "I'm reopening the Lakewood case." The woman's face softened. "You mean Grace and Ethan," she whispered. "You're too late, dear. That story ended a long time ago." Sarah stepped closer. "Did you know them?" "I was their neighbor," the woman said. They were good kids. Always laughing. I used to see them walking hand in hand. Then one night, I heard screaming from the lake. The next morning, the police were everywhere. She looked at the floor. I told them I saw someone else. A man in a dark coat. But no one listened. Sarah's pulse quickened. Someone else. Not Ethan. The woman nodded slowly. No. Ethan wasn't the killer. He was running from someone. I still see lights at this house sometimes. At night. Like someone still comes back. Sarah frowned. Who? The old woman looked out the window. Him. Sarah followed her gaze. Outside, near the trees, she saw a shadow move tall, slow, and silent. Before she could react, it disappeared into the darkness. That night, Sarah set up a hidden camera outside the house. She placed it near the tree line, pointing toward the front door. Then she drove home, exhausted but curious. In the morning, she opened the footage on her laptop. At first, nothing, just the house, silent and still. Hours passed. Then, around 2:13 a.m., movement. A man appeared from the woods. He was wearing a long coat, head covered, walking slowly toward the house. The light from the moon hit his face for just a second. He looked old, maybe in his 60s, but his steps were steady. Sarah's eyes widened. Could it be Ethan Turner? The man stopped at the door, touched the handle, and stood there for a long moment. Then he turned toward the camera as if he knew it was there and whispered something. Sarah paused the video, turned up the volume, and replayed the scene. The sound was faint, almost lost in the wind. But she heard it. Grace, forgive me. Her heartbeat quickened. If Ethan was still alive, he had been hiding for 40 years. But why come back now? She saved the video and stared at the frozen image of the man's face. The mystery was no longer about a missing girl, it was about a man haunted by the past. That night, as Sarah sat in her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about Grace. She took out the tape again and watched it one more time. Grace's eyes looked directly into the camera, full of life, full of love. Sarah whispered, "I'll find the truth for you." Then a soft knock on her door. She froze. Another knock. Louder. She slowly walked to the door and opened it. No one was there. Just the cold night air. But on the floor lay a single rose, still wet from the rain. Attached was a note written in the same handwriting as before. Grace is waiting. Sarah's hands shook. Somewhere out there, the past was waking up and it wanted to be found. Detective Sarah Collins couldn't forget the rose. That single red flower had been left at her doorstep like a message from the past. The note attached, "Grace is waiting," stayed in her mind all night. She couldn't sleep. Every sound made her heart jump. Every shadow looked alive. By morning, she decided she couldn't just sit and wait. She had to dig deeper. Sarah drove back to the station and opened the Lakewood files again. There was one address she hadn't visited yet: Tom Harris, listed as Ethan Turner's best friend. Back in 1985, Tom had been questioned but released. He had moved away years ago, but Sarah found a new record. Tom was now living in a nursing home just outside town. She grabbed her coat and went to see him. The Willow Creek nursing home smelled of disinfectant and old memories. Nurses walked quietly through the halls, and the rain tapped softly against the windows. A nurse guided Sarah to room 12. Inside, an old man sat in a wheelchair, staring out the window at the gray sky. His hair was white, his eyes tired but still sharp. "Mr. Harris," Sarah said gently. He turned slowly. "Who are you?" "I'm Detective Collins. I'm reopening the Lakewood case, Grace Miller and Ethan Turner." At the mention of those names, Tom's hands began to tremble. He looked away. "That case should have stayed closed," he whispered. "Please," Sarah said. I just want the truth. You were Ethan's friend, right? Tom nodded slowly. Yes, we grew up together. He loved Grace more than anything. He would have died for her. Sarah leaned forward. Did he hurt her, Tom? Tom shook his head quickly. No. Ethan could never hurt Grace. But someone wanted to. Sarah frowned. Who? Tom's eyes filled with tears. There was another man someone Grace used to work with at the diner. He was obsessed with her. Followed her everywhere. When Ethan found out, he confronted him. After that night, both Ethan and Grace vanished. Do you remember his name? Sarah asked. Tom hesitated. His lips trembled as he whispered, Daniel Harris. Sarah froze. Harris? Your last name? Tom nodded painfully. He was my brother. The room went silent. Rain hit the window harder now. Tom's voice broke. Daniel was jealous. He couldn't stand that Grace chose Ethan. I tried to stop him that night. I swear I did. But when I got to the lake, it was too late. Grace was gone. Ethan was running. And Daniel disappeared. Sarah's pulse raced. You never told the police. Tom shook his head. I was scared. Daniel was dangerous. I thought it would end if I stayed quiet. But I was wrong. He reached into his blanket pocket and pulled out something small, an old key wrapped in paper. He pressed it into Sarah's hand. Take this, he said weakly. It opens the cabin near the lake. Ethan used to hide things there. Sarah looked down at the key. It was rusty, cold, heavy with secrets. Before she could ask more, Tom coughed violently. Nurses rushed in. Sarah stepped back as they tried to help him, but within moments, his weak heart gave out. Tom Harris was gone. The nurse found something clutched in his hand, a piece of folded paper with shaky handwriting. She handed it to Sarah. It read. I told him to run. I told him they'd never believe him. Sarah's throat went dry. Tom had carried that guilt for 40 years. That night, Sarah sat at her desk staring at the key. What was Ethan hiding in that cabin? And why had Daniel's name never appeared in the case files? Someone had erased it, buried it. She opened the tape again, watching it carefully, frame by frame. Grace was smiling, dancing, holding Ethan's hand. Then, as the cameras shook, something caught Sarah's eye, a reflection in the water. She paused the screen and zoomed in. Behind Grace and Ethan, there was another figure standing among the trees. Watching. Her heart pounded. That's him, she whispered. That's Daniel. The next morning, Sarah took the tape to a digital expert named Mark Evans, an old friend who worked with the FBI on cold cases. They met in his small lab full of computers and screens. He enhanced the final few seconds of the video. As the pixels sharpened, the shadowed face became clearer. It wasn't Ethan. The man behind the camera was older, heavier, and his eyes were cold. That's your killer, Mark said quietly. Sarah nodded, her hands tight around the key. And I think he left something behind. Later that night, Sarah drove to Lakewood, the place where it all began. The road was empty, the trees whispered in the wind, and the lake reflected the pale moon. She parked near the edge, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cabin stood hidden between the trees, small and silent. It looked like no one had stepped inside for decades. Sarah's heart beat faster. She held up the old key Tom had given her and walked slowly toward the door. The wind blew, and somewhere behind her, a branch snapped like someone was following. She turned around quickly, but saw nothing. Her hand trembled as she placed the key in the lock. It turned with a soft click. She pushed open the door. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air. The floor creaked under her boots. She stepped inside, shining her light around. Old furniture. Broken frames. A torn blanket. On the wall, a single message written in faded letters. "We will meet again." Her breath caught. She walked deeper into the cabin, her flashlight shaking slightly. On the floor, she saw something, an envelope under a loose board. She knelt down and pulled it out. Inside were several letters, tied together with a red ribbon. The first one was addressed to Grace. Sarah opened it. The handwriting was Ethan's. "Grace, if you ever read this, it means he found us. I'm sorry. I should have listened. I should have run sooner. But love made me blind. I'll always love you, forever." Sarah felt her throat tighten. The next letter was different, shorter, written in Daniel's handwriting. "If I can't have her, no one will." Her blood ran cold. She looked up, feeling suddenly watched. The cabin creaked. A shadow passed across the window. Sarah turned off her flashlight and listened. Outside, someone whispered, a voice low and rough. "You shouldn't have come here." The night around the Lakewood cabin was thick and silent. The wind had stopped. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. Detective Sarah Collins stood inside the dark cabin, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She had just read the letters, one from Ethan full of love and guilt, and another from Daniel filled with anger and jealousy. Her heart was beating fast. Then she heard that voice outside, low, rough, and cold. "You shouldn't have come here." Sarah turned off her flashlight and held her breath. The cabin door creaked slightly in the wind, but no one entered. She listened carefully. Footsteps moved outside, slow, steady, circling the cabin. Whoever it was, they were watching her. Sarah quietly pulled her gun from its holster. She stepped toward the window and peeked through a crack. Nothing. Just the dark trees and the silver light of the moon. Still, she could feel it, someone was out there. She waited for a few minutes, then slowly turned her flashlight back on. The beam fell across the dusty floor, the broken chairs, and the pile of old letters she had found. But something was different now. A new envelope lay on the table. It hadn't been there before. Her mouth went dry. She walked closer, her boots creaking softly on the wooden floor. The envelope was yellowed but clean, and written in neat handwriting were the words, "Play the second tape." Her blood ran cold. She looked around. "Who's there?" she called out. Her voice echoed through the cabin. Silence. Sarah searched the room again and found a small wooden box half buried under a rug. Inside it was another VHS tape, old, cracked, with the words "Do Not Watch" written in red ink. Her hands shook as she held it. Could this be what Tomsky had really been hiding? Back at her apartment later that night, Sarah set up the video player again. She closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and pressed play. The screen flickered. Static filled the room. Then Grace appeared, sitting in the same cabin, wearing a white dress, her face pale and tired. She looked straight into the camera and whispered, "If you find this, it means he found me." Sarah leaned closer. Grace's eyes were full of fear. "Ethan tried to protect me," Grace continued. "But Daniel won't stop. He said if I ever leave him, he'll make sure no one remembers me. Please, if anyone finds this, tell the truth." Tears streamed down Grace's face. The camera shook. There was a sound, a door opening behind her. Grace gasped and turned around. A man's voice spoke, dark and calm. "Grace. I told you, we're meant to be together." Then the camera fell to the floor. A scream echoed, long, sharp, and full of pain. The screen went black. Sarah covered her mouth, frozen. She replayed the last few seconds again, and in the final frame, she saw the reflection of the man in a mirror, Daniel Harris. Grace had been right. Ethan hadn't killed her. Daniel had. Sarah sat in silence for a long time, her heart heavy. After 40 years, she finally knew what had happened. Grace died because of love twisted into obsession. Ethan ran to protect her memory and Tom carried the guilt until his last breath. But someone had been following Sarah, leaving notes, roses, and warnings. That meant Daniel's secret wasn't buried, someone still wanted to hide it. Her phone suddenly buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, detective. Or you'll end up like Grace." Sarah's stomach dropped. She looked around her dark apartment. The window curtains moved slightly, someone was outside. She grabbed her gun and ran to the door, throwing it open. The hallway was empty. Only silence. She stepped back inside, her breathing fast. Then she saw a shadow moving across her living room wall. She spun around. A man stood there, old, tall, wearing a dark coat. His eyes were cold, his face marked by years of hate. "Ethan Turner." Sarah whispered. The man stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said softly. "But I'm not here to hurt you." Sarah didn't lower her gun. "You've been watching me." Ethan sighed. "To protect you. Daniel's son found the tapes before you did. He's been following you since the day you reopened the case." Sarah's pulse raced. "Daniel's son?" Ethan nodded. "He doesn't want the truth out. He thinks his father was innocent. But Grace's death destroyed everything. I hid for years, waiting for someone brave enough to bring the truth back." Sarah lowered her weapon slowly. Ethan's voice was full of pain, full of regret. "I loved her," he said, his eyes shining. "I never stopped loving her." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. "I know. I saw it in the tapes." Ethan looked at her with tired eyes. "Then help me finish this. Daniel's son will come for you next. But I know where it ends, at Lakewood Pier." Before Sarah could respond, a loud bang shook the window. A shot fired through the glass. She ducked as the bullet hit the wall. Ethan pulled her down behind the couch. "He found us," Ethan said. "We have to go. Now." Minutes later, they drove through the storm toward Lakewood Pier, the same place where Grace and Ethan had last stood together 40 years ago. The rain fell harder, lightning flashing across the sky. Sarah looked at Ethan, who gripped the wheel tightly, his face hard with determination. "What's at the pier?" she asked. "The last piece of the truth," Ethan said quietly. "And maybe my last chance to make things right." As they reached the lake, the road disappeared into fog. Sarah could barely see the water. The pier stretched out like a ghostly finger into the mist. They stepped out of the car. The air was cold, silent. Sarah looked at Ethan. "Are you ready?" He nodded slowly. "I've been ready for 40 years. Behind them, a pair of headlights appeared through the fog. Someone else had arrived. Fog rolled over Lakewood Pier like a white blanket. The air was cold, thick, and heavy with silence. Detective Sarah Collins and Ethan Turner stood at the edge of the lake. Rain dripped from the roof of the old boathouse, tapping like slow heartbeats. Behind them, headlights glowed through the mist. A car door opened. Footsteps echoed on the wet wooden planks. Sarah turned around, gun in hand. A man stepped out of the fog, tall, strong, wearing a black coat. His face looked familiar, like a ghost from the past. Ethan's voice was rough, full of hate and sadness. "Daniel's son." The man smiled coldly. "You finally came back, old man." Sarah kept her gun steady. "You've been following me," she said. "Leaving notes." "Roses. Why?" He looked at her calmly. "Because you were digging into something that should have stayed buried. My father wasn't a monster. Grace chose him. Ethan stole her." Ethan shook his head. "Your father murdered her. He couldn't accept that she loved me. The man's jaw tightened. "You're lying." He pulled out a gun, pointing it at Ethan. "You made her disappear. You ruined his life, and mine." Sarah's voice was calm but firm. "There's proof. The tapes. The letters." Grace was scared of him. The man laughed bitterly. "You think a 40-year-old tape means anything? I came here to finish what my father started." He raised his gun. Sarah moved fast, stepping in front of Ethan. "Don't do this," she warned. "You don't have to follow your father's shadow. You can end it now." For a moment, the man's eyes softened just a little. Rain dripped down his face, mixing with tears he didn't want to show. But then he shook his head. "No, I was born to end this story." He pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the lake. Sarah hit the ground, but the bullet hadn't hit her. Ethan had pushed her out of the way. The shot hit him instead, deep in the chest. "Ethan!" Sarah screamed, grabbing him as he fell. The killer stepped closer, gun still raised. But Sarah fired back one clean shot. The man's gun flew from his hand, and he stumbled backward, slipping on the wet pier. He fell hard, crashing through the broken railing and into the dark, cold lake below. Silence. Only the sound of rain and water. Sarah crawled to Ethan, her hands shaking. His breathing was weak. Blood spread across his shirt. He looked up at her, eyes full of peace. "It's over," he whispered. "Grace can rest now." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "Don't talk like that. You'll be okay. I'll call for help." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. I've been running for 40 years. I just wanted someone to know the truth." "You did that." Sarah held his hand tightly. "You loved her, didn't you?" He smiled faintly. "With everything I had." Lightning flashed across the sky. The rain grew stronger. Ethan's eyes moved toward the lake, where the water rippled softly. "I see her," he whispered. "She's waiting." Sarah followed his gaze, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing on the pier's edge. A young woman in a white dress, smiling softly through the mist. Then she was gone. Ethan exhaled one last time. His hand went still in Sarah's. Sarah sat there in the rain, holding him, as the fog swallowed the pier. The man who had loved Grace Miller, who had lost everything, was finally at peace. The police arrived later that night. They pulled Daniel's son's body from the lake, found the gun, and collected the final tape from Sarah's car. She gave her full statement, telling them everything. The evidence was clear. The truth was finally out. Grace Miller's name was cleared. Ethan Turner was proven innocent. And the real story, the story buried for 40 years, was finally told. A few weeks later, Sarah stood by Lakewood Pier again. The sun was setting now. The water was calm, golden under the fading light. The air felt lighter, like the ghosts had finally left. In her hand, she held two roses, one red, one white. She knelt by the edge of the pier and placed them gently on the water. They floated side by side, moving slowly toward the horizon. Sarah whispered softly, "You both deserved better. The truth is yours now." The wind brushed against her hair, almost like a whisper back. As she turned to leave, she noticed something strange. Her phone buzzed. A new message. No number, no name. Just one line of text. "Thank you, Grace." Sarah froze, staring at the screen. A chill ran down her spine, but a small smile formed on her lips. Maybe it was a trick of technology. Maybe someone hacked her phone. Or maybe it was something else. She looked back at the lake one last time. The water shimmered in the sunset, and for a brief second, she saw two faint shapes, Ethan and Grace, standing together at the edge of the pier, holding hands. Then the wind blew, and they were gone. Sarah whispered, "Rest now. She turned and walked away as the camera of life slowly pulled back, showing the quiet lake, the old pier, and the two roses drifting side by side into the distance. The mystery of Lakewood was finally solved. But some stories never truly end. They just fade into the water, waiting to be found again.